Hello and welcome to the West Ham Breakdown podcast, an Analytics United production. I don't think I ever say that, but I have, and therefore it will become the new normal. Me, Callum Goodall, hosting today in the absence of Jack, who is on a well-deserved holiday, and I am therefore joined by my good friend Darcy Cox, who will be co-host. We're obviously joining after a very disappointing result against Forest. It's another loss, a 2-1 loss at home. One more game to go, guys. Just one more game to go. We're nearly there, and I'm led to believe that the summer is going to be an exciting one, for better or for worse. But right off the bat, what did you make of it all, Darcy? Disappointing, but comical at points.
Yeah, just a bit frustrating, and I think more than anything, it's frustrating because, particularly for people in our position, where part of our job is to analyze the game after it happens. Like, for example, I've now watched this game 3 times, and it doesn't get easier with every watch. It does not get easier. But yeah, it's just a shame to see. Well, not a shame, but it's just frustrating to keep seeing the same things crop up, both at an individual level, but also maybe starting to get the sense that Potter isn't necessarily learning about the squad as quickly as I thought he would, and is still making similar mistakes to things we were pointing out under Lopetegui, and things that he should have caught maybe a little bit earlier in the season when they've happened to him. What you were saying about one more game to go, I think is very relevant to how I'm feeling at the minute.
Yeah, I think frustration is definitely it. I suppose there's an element of, I agree, there's definitely some sort of delay in the learnings, and that I would have hoped would have been picked up sooner and remedied. But then I guess there is also, and it's a dominant narrative actually at the minute, the sort of, well, he's not got his own players line, and I suppose there's probably an element of how much can I actually change really when it's the same bunch of players the whole time, and it's not like the other options you have on the bench are actually that different, because basically everyone is very similar. I'm thinking particularly in midfield, there's not a profile really that you can bring in that's going to inject a burst of energy and pace and dynamic ball carrying, which I think is clearly a huge absence in the middle of the park. What you actually get instead is, okay, I'm going to drop Ward-Prowse or Alvarez and I'm going to bring in Guido or Soler, and whilst they're all slightly different, they're also all kind of much of a muchness really in terms of the weaknesses that they bring and the limitations that they have on the system. So that is frustrating, but I probably do fall into the camp of let's withhold judgment until at least a summer has been had where we can hopefully overhaul a lot, and then I'll start to really have some issues if all of the same problems still exist after we've hopefully address some of the glaring holes in the squad. But sort of, I guess as we touched on, we will break down sort of tactically what these issues were in this game. We will also sort of look at, unfortunately, some of the individuals. Obviously, we'll do a lot of that as we always do on Extra Time, which is our sort of bonus second half, third maybe, because we kind of split the pod into 2 halves anyway, so we'll call it the third, but it's an extra half an hour of chat sort of where we look at individual performances in much greater detail. But naturally, given how at least one of the goals was conceded, we will have to talk about individual performances at some point in this podcast, because they played a huge part in the result that actually came to be. I suppose for any of you that have listened to the preview podcast prior to this game, which is another feature on our Patreon, where we sort of analyse the opposition, talk about how we would approach the match, there were elements that we wanted to take from the United game, some sort of consistency in approach, and I think we did kind of see that. I think we did see some definite attempts to pick up on what was positive in that game and then reapply them in this Forest match. Obviously with some slight variation and tweaks, particularly in terms of roles. And I suppose before we sort of get into the minutiae, how do you feel that went, Darcy? Because obviously it's disappointing when you look at the scoreline, it's 2-1, but then you factor in one of them was just a huge individual error. And at that point, I don't think they'd really done much to hurt us. So whilst it is a loss, you could still come into it thinking we executed the game plan well, or we didn't. And I suppose that's where we need to land, right? We need to come up with a sort of answer to that question. But I suppose the first question is, do you think we did a good job of carrying over the United performance into this game?
I don't think we carry over the performance very well, and I think maybe a lot of that is wrapped up in the fact that Forest have been one of the better teams in the league this season, and United have been near enough. One of the worst is us, United, and Tottenham that really have been the three worst teams. And to be honest, I know that the 5-3-2 was successful against United, and we put together a good performance. I don't think it was ever going to work. In this way, the way that Potter constructed it for Nottingham Forest. One, because one of the benefits to playing United is they play a back five. So if you're going to play a back five yourself, you're actually going to be quite nicely matched up. Whereas as soon as a team that play a back four come up against you, they're going to have a spare man if they use that man correctly. And that did happen a fair few times when Nottingham Forest were building up. And I don't necessarily think that the variation on Souček's role was useful for him. I think he had to be in a lot of different places at the same time. So he'd need to be crashing the box and attack. He'd need to be pressing, like joining the front line to press, but then also he'd need to be defending our box or trying to help us win second balls. And we kind of saw that between the first and second half, because he went from being more focused on one to way more focused on the other for the 10-15 minutes that he was on. So whilst it was, I think it made sense to try and keep some consistency with what we did against United from a even if it's just from a structural perspective, it wasn't necessarily as I guess at least just on a personal level, I think it's better to adjust to the opposition that are in front of you, particularly if something that you did the previous week is easily exploitable by the team you play the week after. I think maybe that sort of cookie cutter in from one performance and then straight into another didn't work well for us, and like I was saying, is not personally anyway, is not something I'm necessarily a fan of. I think it's a lot better to be sort of adjustable or agile, there's the word I'm looking for.
Nice. No, I think that makes sense, and I think one of my biggest frustrations as well with the sort of adaptation to Souček's role was that, to my mind, sort of pushing him that far up the field is only really hugely useful if you're just going to pump it long, because he provides an aerial outlet up there which Bowen and Kudus don't. But it felt to me, certainly in the first half, that maybe less so than usual, we actually weren't going long, even though Areola was still in goal. And I suppose you see that with the goal we concede, right? It's like it comes from the fact that we are dogmatically committed, more so than we have been, to building up from the back. And I think you get that also from the inclusion of Ward-Prowse and Rodriguez. There was obviously a commitment to keeping the ball, building up in deep areas, but trying to sort of, I guess, if in this section we're looking at game plan, I feel like a key part of that was to sort of build and then access the wing backs, which is something we discussed in the preview and something that we wanted to see us do because of the way that Forest set up. And I think then it's like, well, why? What is the benefit of having Souček all the way up there, really? Because he's not going to do much in tight spaces. He's not really a sort of link sort of guy around the box. I think we see a few times he tries to play like a ball in behind, which is probably the right ball to spot the run, but execution of that ball is not on the level of someone like a Soler or a Paquetá. So you're kind of just wasting him. It felt like a bit of a misprofiling. I understand probably that he felt the need to have Souček in there to provide some level of aerial steal, but I just don't know why it was in the 10. I just don't think that was really necessary. But
I think it was maybe because that 10 role is basically, you can only play that role that Souček was playing if you've got unbelievable stamina, because you have to be in so many different places at once. That I actually think Souček is the only one that can play it. And to me also, though, that kind of indicates that it might not be the best type of role or a realistic type of role. If it's one player can play this role because he's able to run around all the time, it's almost like the it's not to the same level, but it's like pre-Declan Rice leaving, and then he leaves and we realise, oh, we actually need two midfielders that can defend. We can't just have one guy that does it all.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Also, just question marks around the system then, right? If you're building a system that has a position baked into it that only one player can do, and he's not even that good at it, he's just got an engine on him. Maybe just try a different approach because it wasn't super effective. One thing I did think was quite effective in terms of our execution of the game plan, certainly at the start, was that ability to access the wing backs. I felt like we saw it almost instantaneously. I think, again, something we talked about on the preview was overload to isolate is probably a bit of a over exaggeration, because I don't think we necessarily overloaded as such. We didn't commit that many players to the ball side. We were kind of just spread, as we usually are with midfielders, sort of across the pitch, but it was clear that there was an effort to build up on one side and then try and ping the ball across the field to the player that's in all the space. And this tended to be Souček, building up with Wan-Bissaka on the left, which I guess, again, is sort of a better use of a player's strengths than maybe Souček in this game, where Wan-Bissaka's got great sort of interchange play. We know that Kilman's comfortable in possession. Ward-Prowse is ticking about. Guido Rodriguez also looked quite press-resistant in the first half. There was a few moments where he sort of slowed things down, took a touch around the player, made the right pass. Still, again, so many limitations in other areas, but I think this functioned quite nicely. And yeah, there was chances created in the first half an hour. I mean, almost within the first 10 minutes, I think, where Souček had acres of space to run into and was able to get crosses into the box, which felt like probably the right way to approach it. I think one of my biggest disappointments was that we didn't get to see Luis Guilherme at the wing-back role, which we obviously proposed in the preview. But I did kind of find myself watching it in the stadium, where Souček, I thought, did a good job in the conditions, but there were moments where I was like, oh man, if Wan-Bissaka was on the right, he would actually be able to take this man on. He would dribble him. He'd jink inside of it, whereas Souček really only has that sort of, I'm going to knock the ball beyond you and try and beat you to the ball in space in a foot race, and obviously has lost a lot of his pace. And I think then you could have had the same with Guilherme on the left-hand side, where his sort of stronger foot is on the outside and he can sort of hold that width and beat his man. So I think it could have been even more effective, but I think in terms of that being our primary mode of chance creation, sort of getting the wing-backs to carry into space and then get it into the box, I think that worked. I just think that when we actually created the chances, we just didn't really actually create high-quality ones. We kind of just felt like we were spamming into the box, and then Milenkovic and Murillo, as they have done all season really, were more than capable of just nodding it back out and letting us try and build it again. I don't know how you felt about sort of the general execution of the in-possession approach, but I just felt like it was all good until the final third. We kept the ball pretty nicely. We did things the way that Potter would have wanted us to do them. I suppose the question mark is just whether, well, we know that the answer is yes, but whether there are issues in the final third.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's definitely issues in the final third, but I agree for the most part that what we did in deeper areas on the ball really wasn't too bad at all. Like you said, I think Souček became so important to us in the first half, and that might have been by design from Nottingham Forest. They would have basically been like, okay, well, firstly, Nottingham Forest decided to press, which is not something we've seen them do a lot this season. I watched the Crystal Palace game and the Leicester game in preparation for our preview stuff on that, and Crystal Palace, who play with a back three, so I thought this will be very
instructive.
Sort of, yeah, exactly. It'll be very applicable to what they'll do against us. Literally, they were dropping off to the halfway line and just letting Forest come forward and then sort of going in their 4-2-4 press from there. But decided to press against us. I mean, there's obvious reasons why they decided to do that. It paid off as well, and we'll come on to that. But I think, if anything, their decision to come out and press maybe helped us a bit. Because they would, like I was about to say, they would often jump really aggressively to their right, our left. So they'd use Dominguez, who is a central midfielder, but was playing right attacking midfield. They would use him to jump really aggressively on that side. And what we were able to do was play through the pivot or play through the back line using the pivot and come out the other side, or play one of those direct switches like you were talking about. And I think their aim was to stop us progressing through Aaron Wan-Bissaka, because really that's been our way to go from phase 1 to phase 2 all season. Get the ball to Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Exactly. And I think they set up quite well to stop that happening. but both the guys in the pivot on the ball were very very reliable in there. I thought they both took the ball on the half turn really well as well. It didn't take too long for the ball to get over there. Guido in particular, I thought showed again that it's sort of the small things where he'll like manipulate the ball just a little bit, just to make like the slightest of angles to play a pass, and then manage to get it out there, keep things moving. And yeah, Sofal became super important to us because of that. Obviously, created that chance. I think it was like in the second or third minute for Souček. It's maybe a bit frustrating that we created that chance like that so early on, because, like you said, there was a lot of hopeful crosses into the box, and I think maybe that happening so early on made our players feel like that was the way to go. But against Forest, that isn't the way to go. And really, I think our best moments probably came in the final third, where actually we were able to move the ball back out to the left once we got into their half. Aaron Wan-Bissaka was able to get onto the ball and combine with Kudus, combine with Ward. It was Ward-Prowse out there, I think. And basically get that. He's almost got like a signature move now where he drives inside, like in almost not vertically, horizontally inside, baits out the centre back, and Kudus runs into that gap, or someone makes a run into that gap. And when we were able to do that, I think there was an instance where he's able to do it for Kudus. There was an instance where he's able to do it for Bowen. And there's also one where he was able to get a Guido run through there as well, where he was able to deliver a low cross. And when the crosses were low, felt like, okay, this could be our way in. It seems like we're getting some high quality or verging on creating a high quality opportunity from this. Not that we ended up doing that. I think really our best two chances in the first half were that Souček header 2 minutes in, and then the Todibo header, which came from the corner straight after that. That's our highest XG chance anyway. But I think decent creation when we were able to get players into the box down the sides of the centre backs in the channels and deliver low crosses. Decent sort of a blueprint that I would like to see us do a little bit more. The aerial crosses from quite a few players, but basically everyone bar Sofal, the aerial crosses were not great. Kudus overhit quite a lot.
I was just going to say that.
Harsh on Cresswell. Cresswell was good in that regard, to be fair, but Kudus, Wan-Bissaka, both overhitting or underhitting crosses, or just forcing them for no particular reason.
Well, it's maybe a fitting send-off in Cresswell and Sofal's final home game that we just resorted to spamming deep crosses into the box in the hope that Souček would get his massive head on the end of one of them. But resorting to type, but maybe not the progress that we had all hoped for at the back end of this first sort of half season on the Graham Potter. But yeah, I echo everything you said there, really. I think Kudus in particular was a major frustration for me. I think so often, and this has been the case throughout the season, really, but particularly in this game, like he would get into such promising positions, he'd drive to the byline, he'd carry into the box, but then it would just be like the cross either went way too deep to the far post, and then Forest were able to just shuffle across and force us back out the box and start again. Or, it would just be like a really weak ball, and whoever went to meet it was never going to win the aerial duel because there was no whip on it, and it was so easy for Milenkovic and Murillo to just deal with it. Or if they did make contact, there wasn't enough power on the cross to actually... You'd have to have like a neck of steel with pistons and like traction engines on it so that you could actually get any sort of power on the ball, because the delivery was so weak. So that was frustrating. But as I say, such has been Kudus' season, really. It has been a frustrating one. I suppose we should probably talk, given that we lost, about our out-of-possession approach as well. I mean, not huge amounts to say, I guess. From me, I think it was disappointing. I think largely, at least to my mind, and I'll pass over to you soon, but I just think, as we said at the start, the setup from the off was just not really working for me. The sort of 5-2-1-2, I kind of felt was doomed to fail, really, from the off, because I just don't think it put enough... I don't think it asked enough questions of Forest. I think they were able to sort of dictate the game on their own terms. It felt like they were able to get the right players in the right areas so that they were never really threatened by our press. Well, press maybe feels like a bit of a strong word for large swathes of the match, but I just never felt like we really wrestled any element of control without the ball in the game. In spite of our efforts, I just think we didn't make the right decisions from a tactical point of view. I guess until maybe that all of the changes were made in the second half, when I do think there was a big change then, which we'll come on to discuss. But just in terms of the game plan and execution, as we did within possession, how do you feel about the out of possession one? Are you sort of on the same page as me with a big dose of disappointment, or have you got some more positivity to bring? Oh no,
unfortunately not. Unfortunately not. No, yeah, out of possession was really I guess disappointing, because it felt like we maybe took a backward step. I mean, firstly with the we'll talk through actually what we did first, I guess.
Sure.
So we had three main assignments from the start, which were both our centre forwards, so Bowen and Kudus, were assigned to the centre backs, and then you had Souček jumping up to like the deepest midfielder. And what Forest did, and we've experienced this before this season. I'm pretty sure it was actually Brighton at London Stadium just before Christmas. Who did the exact same thing, where we pressed them like this. We essentially went with three, and all they did was move Sangare. In this instance, it was Baliba back before Christmas. Into the back line, and then Souček doesn't have a man, and then they have the other three midfielders. So they have Dominguez coming in off the right, they've got Morgan Gibbs-White dropping in from attacking midfield, and then they've got Elliot Anderson, who were also able to drop in, and one of them would drop in and become the six. So that would be the man that Souček goes to get. But the other two were doing this thing where they were dropping out into like the fullback spots. And I think this was particularly noticeable in the first half, with Morgan Gibbs-White coming out to like the left back spot. And there is no solution for us to press that unless we've got players that are able to think on the fly about it. So, for example, is Bowen able to adjust how he's pressing to account for what's happened? Because within the structure, there is no way for us to be able to get out and press those guys, because the centre forwards are assigned to the centre backs, so the full backs are left to be free. There's no way for the wing backs to go up and press it, because they're pinned by Williams and Aina, who are both pushed up and they're on the flanks. What that meant is that the pivot, so Guido Rodriguez and James Ward-Prowse, one of them two had to go out, and they just ended up overwhelmed and stretched the whole game. And that was just when Forest were keeping the ball. There's the whole other side of this, where Forest would keep the ball for a little bit like this. They would draw us as out of sort of place as possible, and then would just look to go really direct and long through Murillo into the front line. And when you've pulled a pivot out that already are not neither of them are the most mobile players in the world, and then you're playing a long ball over their head, you're asking them to recover to try and win the second ball. It's just a recipe for disaster. And to be fair, I think we actually managed to defend using our back three quite well. I thought all of the back three actually coped fairly well. Kilman most of all, because he was the one that was doing a lot of the cover defending. I thought he actually did very well to win the first ball, and a lot of the time make it so that the second ball wasn't in the most dangerous place. But I think picking that pivot, deciding that they need to go and press when you know that, and can see it from the last couple of games, this is the kind of thing Nottingham Forest are doing tactically. It just seemed a little bit misinformed, not thought out completely. And even just sort of looking at the team sheets, you could tell, well, if we're setting up like this and we're going out to press, it would be a very different question if we were going out and saying like we're setting up a mid-block on the halfway line, and Forest, you have to solve the problem. You have to work out how to do this. It's exactly how teams have caused Forest issues over the last month or two. They've put the impetus on them, sat in a block and been like, okay, you guys work it out. If we'd set up like that in this formation, great. It's one of the best formations for doing that. But going to press, knowing that we have those kind of profiles in midfield, it just, to me, feels like Potter doesn't fully get it yet. You can't get those players to do that as well as you coach it. It's never going to go well, and we've seen that multiple times this season. And I'm sure you can tell by the tone that my voice has gone, but very disappointed by what we saw out of possession. Someone's got to take Jack's role, don't they?
Yeah, that's it. I was going to try and bring a dose of positivity, but I think we'll have to save it for the second half, where there was a lot of changes, and we'll put that in the second half of the podcast in a sec. But I think the only thing I would say is I completely agree with everything you said, and one of the biggest frustrations for me is that it's the 37th match of the season. Forest have had a great season, but it's also the biggest evidence base any club that has played them so far has had, because it's the latest game, if that makes sense. So we have more evidence than any team so far this season has had to face Forest. you've got players that you could get to set up in that mid block. I'm just thinking about the role that he gave Souček as the biggest thing. It's like you've pushed Souček so far up the pitch, but he's not really mobile enough to actually cover the ground quickly enough to cause any problems in the press. You've also then allowed Forest to just boot it over his head when he does press. And then of the three midfielders you've chosen, the one of them that is the most capable of stifling counterattacks by way of their positioning and ability to break up play in the middle of the park is actually nowhere near the ball because you've just asked him to press, which we just shouldn't be doing anyway against Forest. So I think that was hugely frustrating because I think you didn't really get anything out of Souček out of possession, and based on the current squad, certainly the midfielders, he probably is our best out of possession player, and I think we could have really caused some problems for Forest. So that was a huge frustration, but again, as we say, I was going to say hopefully we'll take some learnings from it and move it into the next game of the season, but it's literally the last game, and I don't know. At this point, I'm just like, right, run out with Guilherme and Orford next week, and let's just see what happens. But we'll leave it there. A fairly doom-laden first half of the podcast because it was a disappointing game, but there were some shoots of positivity in the second half. There were 4 substitutions made all at once, which is always funny. And it also turned into a bit of a pantomime. So there will be a lot to talk about in the second half of the pod. So please stick around. We'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We realised in the break that we didn't even discuss the goal. We did not discuss the Forest goal, and I can only assume that is because both myself and Darcy have tried our very best to erase it from our memories, because everything we've been talking about all season was crystallised into one perfect moment. And on the one hand, there was an element of me after the goal going, well, you know what, Areola, at least you've tried to play it short. You've sort of removed that hard-coded wiring in your brain that says I have to go long under any amount of pressure. The other half of me said, what on earth are you doing? You can't play that way. You don't know how to do this, and therefore you should have just punted it and got us out of all danger. But instead, what we got was a goalkeeper that sadly just cannot play sort of short, under pressure, incisive football at the back that sort of baits the press. Tried to, completely underhit the pass and gave Morgan Gibbs-White probably the easiest goal of his career.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, there's not. So, like I said, I've watched this game many times now, and I have watched this exact incident play out quite a few times in slow mo, trying to sort of clutch at straws to be maybe like, was the positioning of the pivot not good enough? Like, did they not create the angle? And I mean, fundamentally, I think what you're saying is right. Areola just has a mistake in him on the ball. But I'd also, for some balance, maybe say it's not completely his fault at this point, because we've been pointing this out for months and months and months, and we haven't seen a consequence this harsh as a direct result of it yet. But he's being asked to do something that I think is new to him, something that's definitely not in his skill set. That's very obvious at this point. How fair is it to expect him to develop Premier League level ability with his feet in just a couple of months? I think that's a big expectation from a coach to put on a player. And if anything, there's maybe some questions about like continuing to insist on him doing this, even though he has proven he cannot do it. I know it's the end of the season and we're playing for nothing, but I do wonder if the plan is to go with Areola into next season, like we've potentially heard a couple of times, that it might be. How good is this for him as a player? I don't think very good, to be honest. I imagine his confidence is on the floor, and he doesn't feel very good about his ability as a goalkeeper. And the number one thing you need in your goalkeeper is a high level of confidence. So yeah, it's frustrating, and it's obviously at an individual level, it is his fault. But I do think if your goalkeeper can't do it, why do you have to take the risk so often? Why do you have to ask it of him? But yeah, I mean, I know the opposite to that. I know what the answer is to that, because that's what Potter wants to do. It's part of his way of playing. But yeah, I think there's a certain level of responsibility that also has to be taken by the man that's telling him to do this as well. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think the alarming thing for me is the one you've picked out is the reason that he's persistent with him, even in spite of there being nothing to play for.
particularly in a game where he quite easily could have just given Fabianski the send-off that he deserves, right? I'm not really buying into the platitudes and the romance and stuff. It's a Premier League manager who has to try and get the best 11 on the pitch that he thinks can win the game. He's not here to sort of play to the crowd. I wouldn't expect that to him. It would have been lovely, and I get people's frustrations that he didn't, but I do understand. But what I'm reading into that is, as you say, is it because he's giving Areola as much practice as he can ahead of next season, because he's likely to be our starting goalkeeper? And if that's the case, scary. But also, if he is going to be your starting goalkeeper, in the same way that he has done a lot this season tactically, he's sort of sacrificed some of his own principles because he understands that he doesn't have the midfielders to do it, or he understands that he doesn't have the right profile of wing back or centre back to do everything that he wants to do, and therefore he has to make a few tweaks. If you know that Areola is going to be your goalkeeper moving forward, maybe we find out a way that we can build up that doesn't involve him so heavily. I don't know what that would be. Maybe drop your centre-backs deeper and wider and let them do it in a sort of Brentford-esque way. Just take some of that pressure off him. But yeah, it was disappointing. I think both of us, and I can speak for Jack here as well, because I know that it's the case for him, all of us are in agreement that a goalkeeper should be maybe top of the priority list going into the summer. And I think this was probably the perfect game to sum that up. And for any of you that are interested in knowing who those goalkeepers might be, I will be doing a section with Darcy and Charlie on Extra Time on the Patreon, where we'll be discussing a number of goalkeepers that we think should be in the frame for becoming our new number one. I was going to say replacing Areola, but I suppose that's not necessarily guaranteed, but it's certainly replacing Fabianski because he is going to be departing. So if you would like to hear that, patreon.com/Analytics United, I believe, is the Patreon. And you can get a free trial there and come and listen to everything we have to talk about. There's all sorts of other stuff on there. We'll also be previewing the Ipswich game. We've got a live Q&A coming up as well. So a good time to join. But it's always a good time to join. There's always loads of good stuff on there. So yeah, you should definitely do that. I think we'll also be talking about some of the coaching stuff that's come out in the rumours this week as well. Goalkeeping coach, I suppose, is topical in this moment. Supposedly going to be departing with a new goalkeeping coach coming in. But yeah, we'll discuss all of that on Extra Time, so please do join us. Lots changed in the second half, didn't it? Lots changed. It took a little while, but there was big quadruple substitution, which always feels like an event, mainly because it feels like an acceptance that it is really not working and I need to scrunch up everything that I'd planned for and just make wholesale changes. My gut was that they worked, in fairness. I think the tactical tweaks did work. I think we really felt like we were sort of just running down a bit of a dead end, really, until we made those changes. And then all of a sudden, the impetus of the game flipped entirely. And it felt for large parts of that second half that we were in the ascendancy and not even could nick the equaliser, but it really felt if we did get the equaliser that we genuinely could have gone on and won it. Certainly inside the stadium, it felt like that. I think the referee played a big part in getting the fans amped up and loud in the London Stadium, which isn't always easy to do. But maybe we need some terrible refereeing decisions more often so that we can get a bit of atmosphere in there. But obviously, Graham Potter does not control the referee, but he does control the tactical tweaks and the players that he brought on. How did you think it went, Darcy? And what actually, I suppose, is a better question to ask a tactical genius like yourself. What actually changed? Not just in terms of the players, but what did he ask them to do that was so different?
Well, the first tactical tweak, or the first little change, I guess, was that we didn't see Souček going so high anymore without the ball. If anything, actually, we saw the midfield sort of revert into like Guido as a 6, and then Souček and James Ward-Prowse either side of him as 8s. And in the 10 or so minutes that we got with those guys on the pitch, Souček was actually sitting a lot deeper. And that competition for the second ball that we were talking about when Nottingham Forest were going long became a lot easier with Souček deep. So exactly what you were saying in the first half of the pod, actually. Souček is probably our best sort of out-of-possession player when it comes to reading the game, anticipating, and that's exactly why winning the second ball got a lot easier. So a good little adjustment from Potter, and at least shows that he can see what's going wrong in the game, which I guess is a minimum requirement when you're a football manager. But we'll take anything at this point at West Ham. The other thing that happened is Forest pressed way less when we came out for half time. And obviously you've kind of got the luxury of doing that when you go 1-0 up. And there's also kind of classic Forest as well, as that, 1-0 up is their game state. It's the perfect game state for them. They get a goal, they can suddenly sit in and be good at exactly what they're good at doing, which is being compact and then hitting teams on the counter. But it's also a sign that a lot of the in-possession stuff that we spoke about in the first half of the pod worked quite well. So we were accessing those sort of big spaces behind the winger in front of the wing back that their wing back couldn't necessarily jump out to go and press their full back couldn't jump out to press our wing back. It suggested that it worked really well. And that we'd sort of earned a little bit of respect for Forest. But I agree with them doing that, and with us staying in the 5-3-2, the game was sort of going nowhere. We looked a little bit better, but I think that's more just because we had more of the ball unchallenged because Forest weren't pressing as much. And then we got the big quadruple change that took us to a 4-3-3. And I don't know what you think, but I thought it gave us exactly what we needed. We needed some players that were going to be intense in the middle, in terms of covering ground, in terms of counter pressing. We also needed more quality in the final third, and I think Soler, Füllkrug, and Paquetá are probably three of the biggest in terms of level of quality in the final third, outside of what we already had on the pitch. And I mean, we've said it 1,000,001 times, both Kudus and Bowen just benefit from having a recognised striker between them, because suddenly you go from, the centre-backs are fully focused on Kudus and Bowen to, the centre-back is now pinned, so you're able to get runs in behind from a Bowen. And he's 1v1 with the fullback, which is a lot nicer for him, a lot nicer for Kudus as well, and creates the best conditions for them. So I think some good adjustments.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it was crying out for particularly the introduction of Soler and Paquetá. I think whilst it was clearly the game plan to access our wing backs, which we did effectively, it was way too one-dimensional for me in the first half. It was like, okay, cool, they're just going to pop it to the wing backs. We're going to shut down Bowen and Kudus really when they sort of drift out wide. I think Nico Williams had a great game. And we'll let them pass it back to the wing-backs. We'll let the wing-backs cross it in, and we'll head it out. And we're just going to rinse and repeat that because we had no central penetration. Ward-Prowse, Rodriguez, great sort of possession enablers, good sort of tempo controllers in terms of keeping the ball ticking over. If, as we found ourselves in many moments in this game, you find yourself sat in their half, knocking the ball around and trying to break into the box, neither of those players are going to be the one that plays that sort of penetrative line-breaking pass in behind to access Kudus, Bowen, or Souček, actually, because he's also not going to play that pass, but you're not even asking him to do it because he's the one in the box to get on the end of it. So introducing Paquetá, I mean, you see it for the Bowen goal, and by the way, what a goal. Insane touch and finish. But that sort of clipped, lofted ball over, just executed well rather than just sort of overhit or underhit or hit at a Forest player. It's such a simple thing, isn't it? But just having that element of quality to mix it up a bit, you don't have to just go through the wing back. You can actually now sort of build up in central areas. Was very pleasing, and then also the aggression of sort of Alvarez, Paquetá and Soler just snapping into every challenge, allowing us to play slightly higher up the pitch, meaning when our chances do eventually get headed out, we're the ones that are getting back on the ball and restarting a phase of possession rather than being sort of countered and having to see Wan-Bissaka sprint back with Elanga. So yeah, it was definitely a positive change. But then the momentum was sucked right back out of us because we conceded a really, really crap goal, quite frankly. And I don't have the numbers, but I think it probably the longest VAR check of the season. It certainly felt like it in the stadium. And I don't know the name of the guy, but I was sat next to one of the Forest analysts, and to say that he was not happy would have been an understatement. There was lots of punching of desks. But he got his way in the end, and we had a bit of a chat, to be honest. So I think we were both dumbfounded as to why it took so long anyway. It was quite clear that it wasn't offside, in my opinion, very early on. So I think as much as I would have liked it to have been ruled out, I kind of was in agreement with him by the 5th minute and was like, okay, now I'm annoyed. Now I'm going to start punching the desk as well. And I thought it was quite telling that the West Ham fans and the Forest fans in the stadium sort of joined each other in a chorus of FVAR. So for both of the sets of fans, for West Ham fans basically cheering for the goal to be given almost, in terms of of just abusing the ref and sort of everyone above the ref. But I suppose whilst it was a disappointing goal to concede, I think we defended the free kick badly, whether it was offside or onside. I think what was maybe even more disappointing and deja vu was the defending in the build-up to the free kick from a certain French centre-back, Darcy.
Yeah, really, really clumsy to give away the free kick. And yeah, it's I don't know, I'm getting a bit worried about Jean-Clair Todibo because we've spent a lot of money on a guy that comes with firstly a really, really high level on the ball reputation. I can't recall. There's maybe one game where it's been notable how well he's done on the ball, and outside of that, I've not really seen anything at all. And then he across the season, his success rate in ground duels has been good. More than good, it's been very, very good. He's been one of the better players in the league. But more recently, as teams, or as I think players have maybe started to target him, or we've just seen more instances of players getting in down the right as he's become responsible for the right channel because Aaron Wan-Bissaka is high or Vladimir Sofal is high. And he just seems to commit himself so quickly. And I don't know whether it's because he's still recovering from something somehow, and isn't fully isn't in the right physical condition fundamentally, and therefore approaches these things with a little bit of I don't know, clumsiness. That's the word that I really associate with him in these 1v1s at the minute. Hopefully a pre-season without injury does him really, really well. But yeah, I think it's a bit of a worry that he seems to look so weak in situations like that. Really bad free kick to give away. Obviously leads to the goal, and he has no culpability in terms of what happens in the box. But he has all the culpability in terms of being sold that easily by Elanga. Even things like, I mean, I'm not a professional footballer, but certain things like body position, everyone understands, right? And this guy was completely square in the way that he went into the challenge, which meant all he really could do was sort of lazily throw a foot out because he's not side on. He's not trying to show Elanga anywhere. And when you're not seeing basics like that, there has to be some level of questioning, I think, about, especially when someone comes with a 40 million price tag. It's hard not to be asking those kinds of questions.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of fans talk about their willingness to potentially flip Todibo this summer. Obviously, we've paid that money, but I think we've kind of left ourselves in a bit of a tricky situation, right? Because based on the performances that he's put in this second half of the season, when he's sort of got more regular minutes, you're not making a profit on him. Like, why would anyone pay more than what we've just paid for him, given that his performances have been below the standard that everyone expected him to put in? You're going to take a loss. And what, you're going to take a loss literally weeks after you've parted with that cash? It doesn't make any sense to me. I just don't think it's smart. I think, particularly when there is still a question mark of, oh, well, maybe if he has a good pre-season, he'll become the player that everyone expected him to be. Because I think what you wouldn't want to do is cut your losses and then someone else gives him that pre-season and then all of a sudden he's the £60 million centre-back that he's sort of often been touted as. So I think really the plan has to be keep him around. We've just paid for him. Bring in a centre-back to compete with him. And if that centre-back plays better, then unlucky Todibo, you're going to have to fight for that place, and I think that can only be a good thing, right? We're going to have to go and get a centre-back anyway because Cresswell's going, who's been one of our centre-backs this season. Agurd is sort of positioning for a move by the sounds of what we're hearing in the media. Mavropanos is likely on the chopping block, so we're clearly going to have to spend some money in that department. So if you can go and pick up a decent value option that can put some pressure on Todibo, then then I'm all for it. But I really just can't see us cutting our losses, whether you think that's the right thing to do or not. Another issue for me, and I suppose Todibo comes into this because I've not been that impressed with him aerially actually either. But just more broadly speaking, for a team that has quite a fair number of tall players, Souček, Todibo, Kilman, we are very bad at defending set pieces these days, which is even more disappointing given how good we used to be at it, right? It used to be one of our biggest strengths. We used to score from set pieces and we used to defend set pieces really well, and that would give us those marginal gains. Now, I feel like I'm concerned we're going to concede every time we concede a free kick, and most of the times we concede a corner. And I never really feel like we're going to score from any of our set pieces, even though we've got Ward-Prowse. I mean, occasionally from like a sort of wide free kick, but I don't think our corners have really been anything to talk about recently. So just a general note of disappointment on that as well. I know this half was supposed to be more positive, but as the season runs out, we're struggling. And obviously conceding that meant that Forest were even more happy to sit off, because we said 1-0 is their preferred game state. How about 2-0? They've got breathing space, they've got a cushion, but we did manage to still create chances. We did create chances, and I think the most obvious takeaway, again, I don't want to tread on well-trodden ground, we've talked about this a lot and it's obvious to anyone that's watched us this season, but Bowen is 10 times the player when you put him in his preferred position, which is right wing with a actual centre forward taking up the centre backs and then creating space in the box for him to arrive late, be a bit of a nuisance, create scrappy situations, because when it is scrappy he can make something out of it. We see it with the goal. He's got no right to score that goal. He takes a fairly, I don't want to say lucky because there's a lot of skill involved, but the fact he's managed to actually trap that ball in the box against defenders that are touch tight is impressive in its own right. Then to thunder whack it into the middle of the goal. I know it's like basically on Sells, but he hits it so hard and so unexpectedly that Sells doesn't really have a chance anyway. You don't get that if Bowen is playing the role of centre forward, because the centre back just picks him up from the off. He's not got the opportunity to arrive late. So it just frustrates me when we have to see, but even in a front two, right? Okay, great. What, you've got Bowen and Kudus pretending to be a striker. Okay, yeah. Brilliant, cool.
And neither of them are moving like the striker for the other one, so it doesn't even work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also, like, Mario and Milenkovic must be rubbing their hands. They're like, all right, sweet. We're not pretending to be centre-backs. We've been two of the best centre-backs in the league all season. So if you want to put your pretend strikers against us, we will happily just take that battle all day long. As soon as you then sort of cause question marks for Milenkovic and Mario of like, oh shit, I was covering Bowen earlier and now he's over there, and do I go or do I stay, or I need to position myself better to be able to anticipate his late arrival. And yeah, all of a sudden we started causing problems. We're seeing Paquetá ping balls in behind to try and free up Bowen. Just infinitely better. I don't know if Füllkrug's going to be around next season. It feels like every player you could insert into that sentence, because everyone seems to be available. But regardless of whether he's here or not, we're going to need to buy another striker anyway, I think, because we can't count on Antonio's fitness, and also Füllkrug's not a long-term option. But we just have to go and get a centre-forward, because I can't really look at next season and think about Bowen as a striker, because if you're doing that, then what are you doing? You've got one of the best wingers in the league, and you're limiting him by playing him up front. Like, what? Just what?
It's like putting Salah up front. You go, Salah scores goals, let's put him up front. You take away everything about his game that is good coming in off the right.
Or Saka. You're going to play Bukayo Saka up front? No, you're not.
I think Arsenal fans want to play him as like a right 8, so God knows.
Well, yeah, true. But that's preferable. Would I rather see Bowen as a right-sided central midfielder or a striker?
Oh my God.
Very interesting concept. But yeah, I don't think there's much more to say than that. It was just incredibly frustrating. Bowen scores another great goal, and lo and behold, it comes after he's been switched to his preferred position. So yeah, we just need to see him played in that position. And it's not even like before, where it was kind of like, oh, well, we're having to play him out of position because we want to have Paquetá and Kudus in the team, and Bowen's the one that can play up front best out of those three. Like, we have positions for them now. We can have Bowen on the right, we can have Kudus on the left, we can have Paquetá in midfield, and then you can still have room for a striker. So there's not even an excuse anymore. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. All right, I've had enough. I suppose that brings all the moaning to a close, really. And we sort of round up with the main takeaways. Let's capture the narrative of the game. And I think the main narrative was the terrible refereeing, but I don't even want to get into that. I think Charlie put in the chat that it felt like WrestleMania in the last 15 minutes. It was just like some of the things that the ref did. Like I said, I don't want to get into it, but I do want to just say how ludicrous it was in the 4th minute of added time for the ref to walk almost the full length of the pitch to give a yellow card to a member of the coaching staff on Forest's bench, and then just walk back and not like really account for it. Like, just jog, man. Like, we've got the momentum here. We're building up ahead of steam. We can go and get that equaliser, and you've just sucked all of the life out of the game by spending a minute to walk to give a yellow. Like, I was furious. But yeah, I suppose main takeaways. Potter. Do you want him to? This is kind of what's come away from the whole chat in this podcast. Really, is there's a decision to be made, and it's an awkward time to talk about it, really, because it is the end of the season, and I suppose the answer after the Ipswich game is a very different answer to before the Ipswich game, right? But particularly difficult in a meaningless game when the team's already down and we're kind of just treading water. But principles or pragmatism, where do you fall on this? I know where Jack would fall, and I know where I fall. I feel like you're probably in the middle. I think I'm more commit to your principles and hope that the players can do it if they can't get rid of them because you're the manager and you manage this company, so to speak. I think Jack's more pragmatism at all costs. Win games, ugly if you need to win games, which I've definitely got a time and a place for, but I'm definitely closer towards the principle side of the spectrum. I wonder where you would sit.
I would say generally, I'm more of a pragmatist, and I think particularly in the case of West Ham, it's quite important to not even. I think you can get a nice blend of both, right? You can have principles, but it's which is more important at the end of the day, principles or exploiting the opposition. So like if we take this game, for example, and some of the things we saw in this game, is it more important to stick to Graham Potter's ideas where one of his main principles is I want a press on the ball at all times, so going to have to find a way to construct a level of press, and I want to build out the back through the goalkeeper. Those aren't things that if you were being pragmatic about the game and looking at it, we need to exploit Nottingham Forest and play in a way that essentially targets their weaknesses and also minimises our own weaknesses. I wouldn't necessarily say you'd lean into those principles. And maybe you can find better ways to exploit the opposition. For example, we talked about it on the preview. Forest are horrible when they have the ball. If you make them have 60% of the ball and you have 30% of it because you drop off, they're not very good. But Potter wants to keep the ball because that's one of his principles. And it, to me anyway, it feels a little bit like we essentially played into Nottingham Forest hands by just pressing with 3 players, trying to keep the ball in deep areas really slowly. And just generally not seemingly targeting Nottingham Forest enough, you know, and I guess you're right. I do fall kind of in the middle, which I guess is useful for across the three of us, because I agree with you where I think it's important that a coach has every coach has underlying principles, and there should be certain things that always stay the same, but I don't think they can be too specific. So something like always maintaining a press, I think there is a time to do that and there is a time to not do that, and you have to be flexible in those areas in terms of the personnel that you have, and that's where I would like Potter to be more of a pragmatist. I know he has a way that he wants to play, but I think he also has to accept that he's got different profiles available to him than he's probably ever had. He's had a squad that's constructed for a fairly direct style of play, and they're not necessarily going to be players that can do the type of things that Potter is used to players being able to do. You know, he hasn't just got like a Leandro Trossard or a Pascal Gross to pull out his back pocket and be like, you're a great footballer, you get it tactically, so you're going to go out on the pitch and do it for me. So yeah, that was a lot worse to stay right on the fence in the middle.
Darcy fence sitter, I'll put that down. So I guess I'm probably in the Am I Postacoglu? Maybe I'm Postacoglu.
I think within AU,
Moyes is Jack, really, isn't it? And what you're, I think you're. I'm gonna go Thomas Frank. That feels like a nice. That feels like a nice in the middle. He's got some principles, but he switches it up every now and then. You can play with the ball. You can if he wants. Sweet. Okay. Well, that's time now, really. Some of you will be sat there thinking, "Hang on a sec. Callum hasn't mentioned a certain young Brazilian." What's going on? Is he okay? Like, he wants to talk about this kid at every available opportunity. Well, that's where you're gonna have to join us for extra time because, as always, we discuss individual performances there. And I think I probably would have given Guilherme man of the match, to be honest. He just came on and... but that might just be a personal affection that I have for,
so far, I was crying.
He came on and had another great cameo. I tweeted after the game that he should be starting against Ipswich. It's a nothing game. He's done nothing but impress every time he's come on. I thought this game probably was the most apparent, I think, because he showed a bit of everything. He showed that he can carry the ball out wide. He showed how desperate he is to get on the ball, which I think is something that we really want. And it's not a desperation to get on the ball in deep areas. He's screaming for the ball on the edge of the opposition box when there's 3 players around him, and he still backs himself to receive that. And he's secure. He doesn't really turn over possession all that often. He dribbles in a way that makes you think he's about to lose possession because he takes so much risk, but he still seems to get out of it. He creates, I think he created two, maybe even 3 chances just in the 15 minutes that he was on. But yeah, we'll talk about him a lot more on extra time, as all the other players also. Sofal, Cresswell. I'm going to miss those guys. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Please do join us on extra time if you want to hear about all that. If you want to hear about some crazy goalkeeper from the Mexican league that's basically Ronaldinho with gloves on, then yeah, come for that. We'll talk about some coaches, just general good vibes on there, and Charlie is the king of good vibes and he'll be joining us, so yeah, please do join us there. I've already said thanks, so I'll leave now. Come on you irons, and hopefully we can wrap up the season with a win next week, because I don't know if I can do this again. Thanks.